Okay. All right, let's begin. This parasha is a fascinating parasha. My notes, here they are. This parasha has so much to it. And, I find myself saying this every single week, that these parashiot instead of Bereshit cover so much. There's so much depth to them that I feel like we never, ever scratch the surface. So not sure when the surface scratch will happen, but B'ezrat Hashem, hopefully we will gain some deeper insight into this week's parasha. If only just questions. Not even sure we're going to be able to get to the overall approach, but let's see what we can cover in the short time that we have. So I just want to welcome everyone. A very good evening to everyone. And today's parasha basically is kind of a major significant portion, simply because it stands in the crossroads of Yaakov's major crises. So just to refresh your memory, we all know that in the end of the saga with Yosef, and they all live happily ever after, we can say that, not really, but the story at least ends on a good note, at least till Yaakov dies, where Yosef is reunited with his father. Yaakov Avinu comes down to Egypt, and Yosef is viceroy of the entire country. Essentially, Pharaoh was ultimately going to be the one who's one of the few kings, one of the 7 kings, in fact, Midrash says, that ruled over the entire world. So this was the most powerful country in the world. And he eventually goes in to meet the great Pharaoh. And if you have a Chumash in front of you, Perek Mem Zayin, Pasuk Zayin, and Paro meets Yaakov, and I'll just read it to you. Vayaveh Yosef et Yaakov Aviv, vayamideu lifnei Paro. Perek Mem Zayin, chapter 47, Pasuk 7. Pasuk Zayin. Vayamideu lifnei Paro, and Yosef brings his father Yaakov in front of Paro. Vayivarech Yaakov et Paro, and Jacob blesses Pharaoh. And this is where it gets awkward. Vayomer Paro el Yaakov, Kama yemei shenei chayecha. How old are you? All right. Bit of an awkward question, especially someone so elderly. And Yaakov responds, Vayomer Yaakov el Paro, yemei shnei megurai shloshim u'ma'at shana. I am actually 130 years old. Me'at v'ra'im hayu yemei shnei chayai. Few and bad have been the days of the years of my life. And they have not reached the lifespan of my forefathers in the days of their sojourns. So what's essentially prompting Pharaoh to ask Jacob his age, it's not just like, he's just in the mood to find out how old Yaakov is. You have such an incredible son. How old are you? No, that's not what's happening. Seems to be on Yaakov's face. His whole being is kind of giving off this energy that, he's really old. And Yaakov says, I may not be that old. In fact, my parents are much older than me, and I've still got a long way to go, hopefully. But I look old because of the trials and tribulations that have befallen me over my difficult life. And I think this week's parasha is, by way of introduction, I think really kind of embodies the troubles Yaakov is going through. Yaakov, we know last week's parasha, has gone through, running away from a young age from his murderous brother who wants to kill him, sent off to Lavan's house. Lavan, his dear father-in-law, really messes him around. He's there 22 years. Rashi says, or Yaakov says, tens of times Lavan just changed his wages, messed him around. We know Rachel, Leah, married him off. His wife didn't have kids. So many difficult troubles, and each one in its own right, would really throw maybe any one of us, off the cliff. But Yaakov pounds ahead, 22 years, he eventually has to run away from his crazy father-in-law, and essentially gets caught up by his dear father-in-law, who the ultimate narcissist. I always said Lavan is really, if you want to know what a narcissist is, Lavan is the ultimate. What does he say? Last week's parasha, if you want to turn to the parasha, it's amazing. And what is a narcissist? A narcissist, very simply put, is he doesn't treat people like people. He treats people, he or she, treats people like objects. You have to do this because I own you. That's what a narcissist is. And guess what Lavan says to Yaakov? He catches up with him, and he's trying to have some sort of conversation with him. And then he says to him the following. I love this pasuk.
Your children are mine. Your wives are mine. Your family's mine.
You got it, Dan. So chapter Lamed Aleph, chapter 31, pasuk Mem Gimel, pasuk 43. Vayan Lavan, Yaakov's trying to tell him how hard he's worked. And Lavan responds very simply. Vayomer Yaakov, he says to Yaakov, Habanot benotai. The girls are mine. V'habanim banai. And the boys are mine. V'hatzon tzoni. And the flock are mine. V'chol asher ta ro'eh lihu. And everything you see is also mine. Okay, so I think this is really, who encapsulates who Lavan is. But we move on, and they make some sort of treaty. And the pasuk finishes off with Yaakov halach ledarko, and that's pretty much. And this is already chapter 32. And essentially, Yaakov meets a bunch of malachim, a bunch of angels. And last year we gave a elaborate discussion, elaborate discussion about exactly who he met. These malachim, are they real malachim? Are they real angels? Or are they like figurative angels? Are they regular messengers? Rashi takes on the opinion, the first Rashi in this parasha, malachim mamash, real angels. But either way, he meets these angels. All right, that's really where last week's parasha closes off. We come to this week's parasha, and the drama begins, and we'll elaborate a little bit more as we go along. But we know the story with Esav and 400 men, and whether it's 400 men with 400 soldiers each, it's this huge army coming along, and Yaakov is a bit traumatized, trying to figure out what's the best way forward, and eventually he kind of figures it out with Esav. Again, we'll talk more about that soon. We know he has a fight with some sort of being in the middle. Again, we'll talk about that soon. Eventually, finally, he's got a bit of time to kind of relax, and they part ways. And straight away, Vatetzeh Dina bat Leah, and the whole story with Dina. Dina gets raped, and the brothers are livid, and they're trying to figure out what to do. They send, they come enter negotiations with the people of Shechem. We spoke about this 3 years ago. And Shimon Levi, one night, the third day of Brit Milah, come along, and they just kill the entire city, wipe out all the people, and essentially they come back to Yaakov. Yaakov says, "What have you done? We're going to be pillaged as a result. You can't just wipe out entire city." Would our sister become a harlot? Is that how we should treat her? And it's interesting, as we spoke about this in the past also, how Yaakov doesn't actually respond in this week's parasha.
Exactly.
Later, in Parashat Vayechi, if you remember, he does respond to the wrath of Shimon and Levi, but again, he waits to respond.
He bides, yeah.
Fascinating. Everything.
No, but that's an important item, Rabbi. The fact that he bides his time, he doesn't respond to the people after he hears about Dinah. Why? Because his sons weren't there. One day return, and then it brings up the point you mentioned a couple weeks back about keeping silence.
Uh-huh.
Would there be so much bloodshed if he had not kept his silence?
Wow. Well, it seems to be it was a good thing. And I was referring to the pasuk later, where later on, when the brothers, after the whole pillaging of the city, where they finish off. I'll read it to you. This is Pasuk. This is Pasuk Lamed Aleph. Sorry, Lamed, Pasuk 30, and chapter 30, 34, Pasuk 30. Vayomer Yaakov Shimon ve'Levi, achartem oti lahav isheni. He said, you have discomposed me, make me odious amongst the inhabitants of the land. Amongst the Canaanites, amongst the Perizzites. I'm few in number, and should they band together and attack me, I will be annihilated, I and my household. Yaakov is petrified that this can really be a serious threat to the lives of his entire family. Vayomeru, and Shimon Levi answered, should he treat our sister like a harlot? And that's the end of the scene. No response. And that's the responses later on, before Yaakov dies, where he gives musar.
Yes.
He rebukes his children.
Yeah.
It's fascinating how he kind of manages to remove himself from the situation and define where is the strength of Shimon Levi and where is the failures of Shimon Levi. And he does like a surgical operation. It's fascinating as any educator will relish these psukim, because A, the way he didn't respond, simply put, B, the way he responded to his children, and C, the way he was able to figure out the strengths, literally, that Shimon Levi have that passion. Yet in this context, perhaps it was misplaced passion. That's not to say that because you have misplaced passion here, that you cannot go and use it somewhere else. And what he does is, the famous Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, he says that he split that up, and he splits Shimon Levi to go be the Melamdei Tinokot, to go be the teachers amongst the Jewish people of the young children. And the obvious question is, you want these bloodthirsty murderers to go and teach the young children? I mean, simply you would have said, you guys, you can't control yourselves. You put a cap on it. And this is where Yaakov's greatness was. He says, you, Shimon Levi, you have this passion. Use that passion and channel it appropriately. Channel it to use for the children, to be able to teach for the next future generations. It's a beautiful idea, but again, we're getting carried away. We've got so much to cover. And the pasuk, the parasha continues with the next tragedy where Yaakov is moving on, and Rachel has her second and final child, otherwise known as Binyamin, and interesting name. She wants to call Ben Oni, the son of my sorrow, and Yaakov changes it to Binyamin. But ultimately, at childbirth, Rachel passed away. Next person to pass away is Yitzchak, and I forgot to mention a couple of psukim back. Also, it says, "Vatamot dvora meneket Rivka, vatikaver mitachat bet el tachat alon, vayikra shemo alon bechut." Dvora, the wetness of Rebecca, dies, and she's buried in Bethel, and then they place alon bechut. So Rashi points out immediately that what's the difference? Who's Dvora, the wetness? We've never heard of her before. Where did she come in? Again, we've spoken about this in the past, but Rashi says this alludes to the death of Rivka, that although Rivka's death is not mentioned at all in Torah. And the reason why her death is not explicit is because people at the time of death tend to talk about the person. And because she had such a, horrendous son like Esav, people would talk perhaps negatively about her. And that's why Torah kind of covers it up. That's Rashi quoting the Midrash. And then Esav marries Ishmael's daughter, and then got the names of Esav. That's where we finished the parasha. And then the next parasha begins the whole saga with Yosef and the brothers. Okay, till the very end of Bereshit. So we have this parasha with four major characters in Yaakov's life who passed away. Who are they? Yitzchak, his beloved father. Rivka, his beloved mother. Rachel, his beloved wife. And the wetness of his mother, who was that close, who brought her and raised her up literally throughout her time, who I'm sure he was close to. was, and that's what the pasuk alludes to it, is Devorah. So these are four major players in Yaakov's life. And then he has Dinah, the whole story. And then he has Esav with the whole story. And then he has the Esav's Malach, where he's fighting. So really, there's so much in this parasha, which kind of really brings out this point, which I mentioned before, that when it comes to Yaakov seeing Paro, he says to him, how old are you? Because he looks like he's had troubles. His hair's not just white. His skin is wrinkled to the level that it's clearly evident this guy is way beyond his years. This guy looks like he's had a really troublesome life. So I think really this parasha kind of frames Yaakov's life as, darkness, as someone who's gone through all sorts of difficulties. And yet Yaakov goes through them. So I want to take a few psukim in the sixth parasha and see how we go through it. And again, I don't know how much we'll get through, but let's try at least to attempt to figure out how much we can actually get done. So I'm just going to pull up the screen. Okay. All right. Can we see the screen? Right. Okay. So the parasha is a very interesting parasha because if you want to split up the parasha, let's leave all the other stories aside because, like we said, there's so much going on in the sixth parasha, but let's focus on the beginning story of Yaakov's encounter with Esav. There seems to be two parts to the story. It begins with Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lefanav, source 1. I didn't put sources on. Let's just put the numbers on. Where's it again? Book sources. No, book sources. Number sources, yeah. So you got source number 1. Vayishlach Yaakov Malachim Lefanav Esav Achiv Artza Seir Sedei Adom. So Yaakov sends messengers to Esav, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. Okay, that's the beginning of this whole parasha, and it kind of finishes off Vayatzev Sham Mizbech Vayikra Lo El Elohei Yisrael, Perek Lamed Gimel, chapter 33, pasuk 20, and that's really after the whole encounter. He meets Esav, he bows down to him, he gives him a hug, it's all good, and they eventually part ways, and that's pretty much the end of this saga. Okay, it's really 2 chapters from chapter 22 all the way through to chapter 32 to 34.
How do we get messenger from Malachim?
Oh, very good. Okay, maybe we'll touch upon that. What's strange, though, we'll come to it in a minute. What's strange is that in the middle of the whole story, in between where Yaakov sends messengers to Esav to try and appease him and all sorts, and then the part where he actually encounters Esav, there is a whole section which seemingly is out of place, albeit it was in chronological order, that's the way it happened, but seemingly it's almost like it's in brackets. Like there's a whole story which kind of needs a bit of an analysis, but it's like almost a story within a story, something very unique,
Yehuda.
something very strange in Tanakh, where you almost find it nowhere. I saw today in 3 other places this is actually brought. Saw this from Rabbi Samet, scholar in Israel, and he says there's 3 other places throughout Tanakh where this happens, where you have a whole story, and within the context of a story, you have a story within a story. Definitely a discussion for you, Dan, to discuss in your book club. There's not many books which has a whole book in another book, right? This is kind of wild, and it needs a bit of understanding. What has that got to do with the story? And
Rabbi, you find it in Shakespeare.
Oh, which one?
Oh, in all of his
Okay. There you go.
works, you find sort
Yeah,
of.
but something which is relevant to the story, which will shed light on the rest of the story. Not just
exactly that. Exactly that.
There we go. Chazak Baruch. So it is not an isolated incident. Obviously, it's something which is very important to understand the rest of the story, and obviously requires a separate explanation. Okay.
What story are you talking about, Rabbi? What story inside the story?
What is
Yehuda?
the story in the story? No, you
The
tell
story of
me.
Yehuda?
Nope.
No. Okay.
So Yehuda is not in the sixth parasha, right? But the story of the fighting of Yaakov with the Malach.
Oh, the Malach. Okay. Okay.
Or,
Sorry.
Ish, it says. Vayivater Yaakov levado, source 3. Vayavek ish imo adalot hashachar. There's a man who's wrestling with him until the break of dawn. Now, who is this man? Maybe we all know that it's some sort of malach, some sort of angel. What's going on? It is a physical wrestling match. We know that practically it had physical ramifications until today. Pasuk Lamed Gimel, Aken lo yochlu bnei Yisrael gid hanasheh. That's why the children of Israel to this day do not eat the thigh muscle, the sciatic nerve. Asher al kaf yerech ad hayom hazeh, ki naga b'kaf yerech Yaakov gid hanasheh, because he touched Yaakov in his hip socket, and basically that is the source for the Isur, the Torah prohibition to eat the hind part of the animal unless the sciatic nerve is removed, as many of you may be aware of, that in Chutz La'aretz, in most places, a lot of places in the diaspora, it's kind of hard to find the back quarter, the back hind of the animal in a kosher butcher shop because of the expertise which is required to be able to remove the fat and the sciatic nerve. But famously the Temanim have a Mesorah about this, the Sfaradim have a Mesorah about this, have a tradition on how to remove it, and therefore if you go to any good Sephardic butcher or restaurant in Israel, you will find some good the back part of the animal. At other places, they actually sell the back half of the animal to the non-Jews, while they only use the front part. But apparently, the back part is much tastier. So, if you go to any good restaurant in Israel, make sure you go to one with a good Sephardi action. Either way, you know where the better food is. Either way, so the bottom line is there's this whole section, and we're going to see if we can reflect somewhat on this connection. But let's go one by one. Let's talk about part 1 and part 2. There's part 1, which is, Yaakov Avinu gearing up towards the encounter with Esav. And then there's part 2, where Esav actually meets Yaakov, and, kind of the things that unfold. So let's try and look at a few distinctions in the Psukim of the 2 parts. Pasuk says as follows: Perek Lamed Bet Pasuk Yudalet, source number 4. Vayalen sham balayla hahu, vayikach min haba biyado mincha Esav achiv. So Yaakov is going for a little rest before this great encounter. And he takes all the different prized possessions to give to Esav so that he can actually pacify him and appease him. In fact, the Ramban Nachmanides famously says that this is one of the places we see Ma'aseh Avot Siman Lebanim, something we've also talked about in the past, that there is a concept called Ma'aseh Avot, the actions of our forefathers, Siman Lebanim, is kind of an indication how we as children or the offsprings of our patriarchs should act in future generations. And Ramban says what Yaakov did is he actually split or did 3 things. He prepared himself, number 1, ledoron, to give presents, to appease, litfilah, with prayer, and finally with lemilchama, a 3-pronged approach how to approach Esav. There's three ways to do it. Well, what's the options on the table? Either be antagonistic, go fight, or by defense, obviously, or you can appease, and obviously that all goes together hand in hand with tefillah to God. So, and Ramban says this is for future generations. That is how the rabbis acted throughout generations. Ramban says in the time of the Romans, the time of the Tanaim, the time of the Second Temple, always whenever the Jewish people had problems with the Senate or with the Roman Empire, then the way they would do it was the way they would approach the politicians at the time was this approach. We would pray to make sure we be successful. But there will be two ways. Either we're going to go and give a treasure chest of gold, president's appeasement from the Jews. And if that doesn't work, then there would be always the final option. But note, final option of going out to fight. And that happened.
Would that be sort of the basic tenets of negotiations or intervention or mediation when countries come together for peace talks, so to speak?
100%, and that's exactly the way the Ramban puts it. I think it's a very powerful Ramban. I'll read it out to you. So this is the opening statement of the parasha.
Well, I'm not sure if you can equate the two like that.
Let me read to you, and then we can talk about it. Nichteva ha-parasha hazot. This parasha was written lehodia, to express this concept. Ki yitzil hakadosh baruch hu et avdo, that God saved His servant v'ga'alo mi'ez chazak mimenu, and saved him from someone who was stronger than him physically. Vayishlach malach vayitzilehu, and He sent an angel to save him. V'lelamdenu od, and to further teach us, shu lo batach b'tzidkato, that he didn't just rely on his righteousness. V'ishtadel behatzala b'chol yicholto, didn't sit back and say, yeah, Hashem will help. No. He actively pursued a practical form of saving himself. With all his strengths. V'yesh ba'od remez dorot, says Rambam. There's another piece to it. There's another remez, another significance for generations. Ki kol asher ira la'avinu im Esav achiv, that everything that happened to our forefather Yaakov with his brother Esav, ye'era lanu tamid im bnei Esav, will always happen with the offsprings of Esav. V'ra'u lanu le'echoz bedarko shel tzadik, and it is appropriate for us to use this as a basis. Shnazmin atzmenu leshloshet hadvarim sheizminhu et atzmo, to come forward with a plan the same way that he did, with this three-part approach. Litfilah, prayer, ul doron, presence, ul hatzala b'derech milchama, and to save himself through battle. Livrach ul hinatzel, to run away and to be saved. And then he goes back, like he said before, that that the actions of the forefathers was a remedy for the children, late generations, in pretty much giving us a formula later. So it's just a very fascinating Ramban. And Dan, you want to say something?
Oh, I was going to say, with Ellen's point, I'm not sure that you can relate the times of the Romans to what Yaakov is going through, because at the Roman time, Israel was basically a vassal state. They had no strength per se. So to say that we've got this three-step proposition that we can approach them with, if not through tefillah, not through gifts, and through fighting, we saw what happened with the fighting. We lost, and we lost big time. We lost everything. All right, so I'm not sure you can relate to that. However, today is a different issue. Today, we can look at our enemies and actually deal with them one-on-one, and we can negotiate, knowing that if that doesn't work, that we can use strength, and we have the strength to do that. And that may be, until this time, I'm not sure we can say any of that worked for us, because realistically, we can look through our history and it's not worked for us. On every occasion, we have lost. We have lost big time, right through the total 1940s.
Well, I can give you a very an example which is very apropos to this period, which is Hanukkah, where the Maccabees had no chance of winning against the Greek Empire with their military elephants, as is described at length, and they won. We say in Al Nisim that the few won the many. So sometimes it doesn't make sense, you're right, but sometimes that's the only option. But again, I think also the process is very clearly laid out for us. It's not fight first, it's fight last.
Right. Okay.
I think that's a very clear formula, which is very
Yep.
powerful in terms of negotiations.
Yep. I agree.
Okay, so let's continue.
So what about this angel?
Vayalan Shambalayla. We're going to get there. Well, we hope we'll get there. Vayalan Shambalayla Hahu. There seems to be, in the few psukim at the beginning of the story, there seems to be a clear timing piece, which the Torah kind of wants to highlight. That this all happened where Esau's kind of getting busy, trying to prepare, for this, scary encounter. And Vayalen Sham Balayla. And suddenly he has a couple of, minutes to sleep 40 winks. He has some time to have a little lay down because he knows tomorrow is going to be a big day. Vatavor Amincha Pasuk Chavbet, Pasuk 22, source 5, Vuhulan Balayla Hu B'machane. And he is sleeping. He's relaxing in the camp that night. Next pasuk, pasuk 23, Vayakom Balayla. And he arose in that night. In the middle of the night, he's getting up. Takes his wives, the children, and he crosses over the ford of Yabok. So, first of all, the Torah is kind of clearly highlighting that there's stuff going on at night where Yaakov has this peace of mind to be able to relax a little bit, take it in, prepare for tomorrow morning, yet he has to get up in the middle of the night and do what he has to do, where he separates the camps. And then he meets this, as he's, separating, taking the children from one side of the river to the other side. The man starts wrestling with him, this malach, ad alot hashachar, until the break of dawn. So suddenly, going from night through dawn. Again, vayizrach lo hashemesh pasuk lamed.
Here is still in his dream.
No,
He
well,
fight in a dream
it doesn't say anywhere it's in his dream. Where does it say in his dream?
where he went to sleep. And this happened during the sleep.
Oh no, he gets up. Vayakom balayla. And after he gets up, he's crossing over, and the pasuk says, let's just turn to the pasuk. Pasuk Chav Gimel.
He was left alone.
But earlier it says Vayilan, which means he was sleeping. So when is he actually sleeping? And this seems to be one of a number of occurrences where so-called angels appear in his life. We don't see that with Abraham.
Which is not uncommon in Yaakov's life. That's correct. That is
Oh,
correct.
but only in Yaakov's life, right? He seems to have this stop everything, stop the narrative, and then there's this kind of supernatural kind of thing happening where he meets up with, here it's called, the reference is to Ish, a man. But in his previous wrestling with so-called angels, they're referred to as malachim, right? Not as anashim or ish, nachon? It's
correct. So that's a very good point.
Yeah.
I just want to read out this pasuk again. Yaakov balaylahu, he's getting up and he moves over. Vayivater Yaakov levado, he's left alone. And then he has a whole scenario with a whole blessing and all that. He's practically limping, and that's a practical message or a practical mitzvah for Bnei Israel not to eat the Sefik. This seems to be all happening in real time, in physicality in this world. It doesn't say like we had in last week's parasha, Vayetze Yaakov, and then he has a dream, and he sits down vayachalom, v'hinei sulam mutavarta. No, this is happening. Now, what is this wrestling match? Is it a physical wrestle? Well, it seems to be he was physically
Injured. Yeah.
But the reference again is to this notion of wrestling. And was it not in that previous encounter with Malachim that the whole idea of his name was changed? Why is he asked his name again by so-called Malachim?
So this is the first time his name is changed, right? He asks him to change the name.
No, the Ish said you can't ask me for my name.
No, the Ish verse says, Vayomer lev ma shemecha, so he asked him for a blessing. Pasuk Chavchet. Vayomer Yaakov, he says, my name is Yaakov. Vayomer lo Yaakov yamer od shimcha ki Israel, ki sarita im Elohim, ve'im anashim batucha.
Right.
Okay, you have been, you've managed to, you have striven with the divine, with man, and they've overcome. And then later on, God says to him, yes, your name is not going to be Yaakov, your name is going to be Israel. Interestingly enough, we put this in brackets. When it comes to the changing of name of Avraham, from Avram to Avraham, the change of name is a literal change where we no longer refer to Avram as Avram. Going forth, we refer to him as Avraham. Same thing with Sarai.
Right.
Sarai is continuously known as Sarah, no longer Sarai. Whereas Yaakov,
he's always that.
Throughout the Psukim, from here going forward, the name is interchangeable.
Right.
There's sometimes he's referred to as Yaakov, and sometimes he's referred to as Israel. We are known as Bnei Israel. But then the Pasuk is very often known as Bnei Yaakov. And you have to try and figure out what is going on. When is it Yaakov and when is it Israel? Simply put, Yaakov is bringing out Yaakov's strength through exile, and Israel is in times of, when the light is shining, when he's overcoming adversity.
When the light is shining.
And that's who we really are, Bnei Israel. We are able to go through Galut and overcome our challenges and overcome our adversaries. So that's in brackets. Let's get back. There's so much again to talk about. It's never ending. Beautiful. That's the beauty of the Torah. Okay, let's get back to our pasuk. Vayivater Yaakov vado ad alot hashachar till dawn. Vayizrach lo hashemesh, the sun rose up. In fact, even later on, when he actually encounters Esav, vayisa Yaakov enav vayar v'hine Esav ba v'imor ba mel'ush, and he looks up, and there's 400 men coming. So he can actually see, he can discern the physical reality coming towards him at a steady pace. So clearly there's daybreak over here, and the psukim before is clearly depicting a scenario of nighttime. Okay, so that's just a point to ponder, but it doesn't have relevance to understanding the basis of our parasha. It's kind of part one, part two, nighttime versus daytime. Is there any significance of that throughout the
Rabbi,
yes.
A quick question. Again, this is a bit bothersome to me, but we talked about this last week. So looking up, Yaakov saw Esau coming, accompanied by 400 men. And what did he do? He divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maids.
Mid-sevens, yeah.
Weren't they his wives? Why are they called maids here? Were they not given to him as wives?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I don't have an answer for it because, again, the reason why they were given over as wives was only for the purpose of, having children, or in order to enable Rachel and Leah to have the merit of giving their maidservants over to Yaakov and living with that reality. Imagine, having that reality in the house. We know in Yevamot, in the Talmud, which talks about what's it called, a woman and a what's two women called when a man is married to two women?
Polygamy?
Sorry, no.
But bigamy? What do you mean?
I don't know what it's called, but in Hebrew, in the term in the Gemara, it's called, there's the Isha and there's the Tzara. Tzara is, the suffering.
But Rabbi, with Sarah,
because
with
each
Sarah-
one's annoying each other, right? There's even Rachel and Leah had these kind of, issues, whether it's, Vayehav Yaakov
Anyways.
Rachel and whatever that is, but all the more so when it comes to the maidservants. Okay, so exactly how that fits into this context of why they're still referred to maidservants when they are the mother of the Shvatim.
Four children, four.
These
Four
are incredible
sons.
people.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anyway, let's not get too sidetracked. But it's a very good question, Dan. Definitely needs looking into. Yeah, it's strange because even the next pasuk, Vayasem et hashvachot v'et yaldehen rishona, he almost like sounds like the Torah is referring to them as the maidservants. Like, do they have no dignity? Do they have no respect?
Yeah.
What's going on? It's a very good question. I think it actually needs some.
What does that say for their sons? The four sons. Are they the brothers or are they not brothers? Are they outcasts?
They're equal. They're all on the Choshen equally. Right?
Exactly. They're equal. So they're not maids to Rachel and Leah at this point. They're wives, equal partners, equal wives. I don't understand.
Let's also put it into context. These are the wives of Yaakov Avinu.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you merited to be the wife of Yaakov Avinu, you were top of the charts. So yeah, okay, it's a fantastic question. Definitely something which needs looking into. But let's try and look through the parasha together. And there seems to be something strange. I can't remember who told me that if Hollywood want to make a killing, then if they would just depict some of the stories in the Torah and just go through it. I mean, some movies have kind of made it, some of the big hits. But just look at the family drama. Just look at the stuff going on throughout Sefer Bereshit alone. Never mind the drama of politics and the congregations and the inner workings of the Jewish people. A stiff, tough-necked nation, right? We know that. Never change. Don't worry. But
we tried several times, Rabbi. We failed miserably. Ten Commandments was a disaster of a movie. Victor Mature as and Shimshon, terrible.
Well,
David and Bathsheba, give me a break. Don't say that. It's a curse. We don't need to make movies.
I must tell you, I mean, I personally have never watched any of these movies, and for one reason only, because when movies put a certain image to a certain scene, whether it's Torah or Nach, you kind of are stuck with that. So if it's a movie about Queen Esther or something, suddenly this is Queen Esther for you. Or, if it's David and Goliath, then that's who David and Goliath is. And it kind of, confines your imagination to a specific thing. That's why reading Ginal's Dan is a lot more creative than watching a movie, because you're not watching somebody else's imagination. You're actually using imagination yourself. But that's a separate discussion. But either way, I'm not suggesting Hollywood should take the Torah and turn it into a bunch of theories. But I'm just saying, if they would, I think it would look very colorful. Why do I mention this? Is because if you look through the parasha at the beginning till the scene where Yaakov meets Esav, there's a little bit of an anticlimax going on there. So let's go through the Sukkim one by one. Okay, so let's look through the beginning of the parasha. Part one of the story we mentioned. Yaakov sent angels ahead of him to Esav, his brothers, to the land of Seir, the field of Edom. And don't forget, until now we mentioned Parashat Vayetzer, we have no mention of Esav. But suddenly we open up this week's parasha, and boom, all the emotions of Esav, his bloodthirsty brother, who wants his head by hook or by crook, is right back. All the animosity, all the hate, all the bloodlust is really, as we read the Psukim, we really get thrown straight into it. Pasuk Zayin. וישובו המלאכים אל יעקב לאמור, באנו אל אחיך אל עשיו וגם הולך לקראתך ו400 איש עמו. You should know, the messengers turn around to Yaakov and say, forget it. This guy, he's got a serious army, band of men ready to attack, 400 men. Next pasuk, pasuk chet. Vayira Yaakov me'od vayetzer lo. Jacob becomes very frightened, and it distresses him. Vayachatz et ha'am asher ito ve'et hatzon ve'et habakar v'hagemalim shtem achorot. And he divides the people with him, the flock, cattle, and camels, into two camps. Vayomer, and he says, Im yavo Esav el hamachaneh ha'achat vehikahu. If Esav comes to one camp and attacks it, v'haya hamachaneh hanishar lifleta, and the remaining camp shall survive. I should also mention in brackets the very famous Chafetz Chaim, the holy Chafetz Chaim, the one who wrote Mishnah Berurah, passed away approximately 90 years ago or so. I think he passed away in 1930 or 1935. 1935, I think. A couple of years before the war, one day he was benching Birkat Hamazon, and he started crying, Rachem na Adonai Eloheinu al Yisrael Amecha. Have compassion on the Jewish people. And the story is, it's told over traditionally that he had tears the size of beans. So they say it in Yiddish, they say, Treren vibabus, size of beans. And he was crying bitterly. And they asked him, what's going on? He said, what's going to be with the Jewish people? The winds of war, people weren't quite there yet, but there was talk about Hitler becoming the Chancellor of Germany, and Chaim died before the war. But they asked him, you can imagine the headlines were already not looking good for the Jews. The Jews didn't believe it. Most Jews stayed. Very few fled at the time. And ultimately they asked him, Rebbe, what should we do? And he quoted this pasuk, and he said, "Vayomer im yavo Esav el hamachana ha'achat vehikahu, vehaya hamachaneh hanishar lifleta." He said, we have to split Klal Yisrael. There should be some of Klal Yisrael will go to one place, and another part of Klal Yisrael will stay. And some will be saved and some will not. And the story continues traditionally that he carried on, and they asked him, so Rebbe, where should we go? Where should we run off to? Which land? And he quoted the pasuk. I think the story goes he did Goral Agra. I'm not going to go into exactly what the Goral Agra is. A very Kabbalistic formula on how to kind of get an inside view of what's going on. And basically, he quotes them the pasuk Ubahar Tzion Tieh Plita. Go to Israel. Go to the mountain of Zion. And as we know, Rommel's army, the tanks of Rommel came till the outskirts of Jerusalem or of Israel, and you could hear the tanks from Israel, but ultimately that kind of didn't materialize, and we know the rest of the story. Either way, we can see very clearly Pasuk Yud Bet, Hatzileni na miyad achi miyad Esav. Save me, rescue me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav. Ki yareh anochi oto. I am petrified, for I fear him, lest he come, pen yavo vehikani em al banim, lest he come and strike me down, mother and children.
Rabbi, can we display the text, please, so we can read it along with you?
I'm sorry, I didn't manage to put all the text because I'm now jumping from pasuk to pasuk. I can put it in right now if you want. Bereshit is 32.
Well, if it's going to be hassle, forget it. Don't.
No, I'm good. 32. Okay, let's just put it in like this.
You got a little bit of time left.
Yeah, I don't have very much time. Okay, so okay, I'll just put it in like this just so you should see it. Okay.
Okay. Oops.
So here we've got over here.
That's good.
It says Pasuk Yud Bet, Pasuk 12. So please deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav, else I fear may come and strike me down, mothers and children alike. I think it's very, very clear that the context of this parasha, part one of the parasha, Yaakov is freaking out. Yaakov is petrified. He's almost anxiety-ridden. He doesn't know what to do. Esav's coming. It's a real threat. And he's going to spit up, the camps, and one's going to be saved, and at least one should be saved because it's very possible he's going to wipe us out. We've got young children and women and vulnerable people and cattle. They can't just run. And there's such a livelihood, stock of sheep and camels and all sorts, thanks to the trick of Lavan. But what's very clear is Yaakov is really petrified. Then we have this story within the story, right? This whole business with the
fight with the Malachim.
Yeah, with the attack, with the wrestle. And then we have the last bit of the parasha, which is where he actually encounters himself. Now you would think Yaakov's not making stuff up, right? He's not freaked out for nothing. It's a very real threat. You would think the rest of the story is Esav comes and he wants to kill him, and like any good Hollywood movie, and then all of a sudden, this happened, and wham, it all works out, and then Baruch Hashem, it's all good. Now, there is such a midrash. Go ahead, Dan.
Rabbi, if we go to the previous parsha, this wasn't Yaakov's decision. Once Joseph was born, he was basically told, take your family, go back to the land. God told him, this is what I want you to do. So in essence, he's following the direction. And I'm not sure where this underlying fear goes when he's being told by God himself to go back to the land of your fathers.
Right. But before he knows it, Esav's coming to murder him. Well, a nice, cushy feeling.
Well,
you mean you think he's just have faith and he's good to go?
Well, what else? I mean, really, do you think Hashem wants to bring him back so that he can die under Esau's hand? I mean, the point is either, Hashem said, no, go back to your father's land, okay, and whatever, and for what purpose? To meet his destiny or his death by Esau.
So again, reading the story 2020 is always easy to say, come on, you could have figured this out. But let's read this in real time. Number one. Number two, we mentioned the Ramban before, Nachmanides, he says, that this is a message for generations, how we have to actively do our part to make sure to save ourselves.
All right.
Number three, we use this practically as a formula on how to act in all future generations. So it seems to me Yaakov was in his rightful place to be able to act in this format, and that's how we learn from it.
Okay.
So here's the challenge. If you look at the Psukim as the Psukim is written, what happens? He actually meets Esav. So let me put it up on the screen. Just so you should have the text. And we don't have much time, so it doesn't look like we'll be able to cover much more, but let's nevertheless see what we can. We've got 3 minutes. Yaakov raises his eyes, just going to run through it, and they each bow until they come to Esav, and then you would think Esav wants to pull out his sword and kill the guy. Pasuk Daled, Vayarot Esav likrato, Esav runs to greet him, Vaychabekeu, and he embraces him, Vayipol tzavarav, and he falls on his neck, Vayishakeu, and he kisses him, Vayivku, and they wept. And then he sees all the children, the wives, he says, who are you? Who are they? He says, what God gave me. He says, take my presents. He says, no, don't worry about it. I've got everything. He says, I've got whatever. I've got everything. He says, no, I want to give it to you anyway. And then basically they split ways. It sounds like, what a good brother. What a beautiful friendship. Yaakov, you got this all wrong. What's going on? Scene one, opening scene in the parasha, this anxiety, Yaakov, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? He's going to kill me. The messages come back. He's going to kill you. You've got 400 men. Then he comes to him, he meets him. Wham! Oh, it's going to be kiss and hugging. So living happily ever after. It's not like all the other parashiot. The beginning of the parasha in Bereshit, we have Cain and Hevel. He murders his brother. Then we have Yishmael and Yitzchak. Not a very happy relationship. We have the brothers later on, Yosef and the brothers, also not a very healthy relationship. There you go, Esav and Yaakov. Beautiful relationship, loving brothers, brotherly love. I talk about that so much. Hey, 1 second, what's going on? Something strange going on over here. Now,
In spite of the background, there is still feeling of brotherhood between them. That they still feel they are still brother.
well, that's what it seems to be. Now, I'm going to mention one midrash, and we have only 1 minute, so I'm going to have to leave you off with a question. If you look over here in the Sefer Torah, actually, on the word Vayishakeu, that he kissed him, there are dots on top of the word.
Hmm.
And the question is what these dots are all about. And Rashi quotes a midrash that there are two approaches on what happened. Some say that Esav meets Yaakov and his heart breaks. He sees the children, he sees the family, he sees his long lost brother he hasn't seen for years. His heart broke, it's all okay. As Dan said, the brotherly love is deep inside. We're all going to work this out. And they go back together. They eventually bury Yitzchak. It's all good. They live happily ever after. One opinion. The other opinion is he actually went to him. He wanted to kill him. He wanted to go up to him, give him this murderous hug, and bite his neck. Vayishakehu, and he kisses him. What happens? Vayivku, and they're crying. Why is he crying? Midrash says because his neck turned into stone. Yaakov's neck, miraculously. And when he kisses him, he breaks his teeth. So he's crying because he's broke his teeth. I think, it may sound like a laughing matter, but I think what's coming across over here is something very clear, that the feelings were not mutual. Or maybe the feelings of fear were mutual. And Esav is actually coming to attack him. And then perhaps there's a hidden element over here which we are not aware about. Not aware of, and that is coming through. So I'm going to leave you off with this point. But perhaps this centralized story, which is bang in the middle of the parasha, between part 1 and part 2, where Yaakov is all freaked out in the beginning, and then he's cool, calm as a cucumber later on, is perhaps because this middle part of the story, this story within the story, where he meets Sarosh el Esav, whatever that means, this ministering angel on behalf of the nation of Esav, of Edom. And as a result, perhaps now Yaakov is not so freaked out. So I'm going to leave you with that point to ponder. And Bezrat Hashem, maybe next year we'll talk about Vayishlach again.
Maybe we can discuss it tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
And that will be the last time the name Esav will appear.
Bye.
That's it.
Have a good night, everyone. That's a very interesting point, Dan. Very interesting point.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.